The thunder of cannons, the clash of sabers, the roar of marching feet. Between 1803 and 1815, Europe became a battlefield without end. At its heart stood a single man, Napoleon Bonaparte. Born on a remote island, he rose from obscurity to crown himself Emperor of the French. He was a soldier of genius, a statesman of vision, and an architect of empire. Yet he was also a gambler, whose ambition reached across nations and toppled kingdoms. The wars that bear his name were not mere struggles of territory. They were wars of ideas, monarchy against revolution, tradition against change, order against chaos. For 12 years, Europe trembled under the shadow of one man's will. This is the story of empires broken and rebuilt, of armies marching to glory and ruin, of a world reshaped by fire and steel. This is the story of the Napoleonic Wars, a saga of brilliance, bloodshed, and destiny. France was a nation in turmoil. A decade after the Revolution, kings had fallen, mobs had ruled, and guillotines had claimed thousands. Into this storm stepped a young Corsican artillery officer, Napoleon Bonaparte. He rose quickly, dazzling with bold victories in Italy and Egypt, showing Europe that France still had fire. In 1799, he seized power in a coup d'etat, becoming first consul. Within 5 years, the people crowned him emperor. At his coronation in 1804, Napoleon took the crown from the Pope's hands and placed it upon his own head, a defiant gesture to show that his power came not from God or kings, but from himself. Europe watched nervously. This was no ordinary general. This was a man who saw destiny before him and meant to seize it. Napoleon's ambitions soon brought him into conflict with Britain, Austria, and Russia. In 1805, at Austerlitz, he faced them on a frosted December morning. Outnumbered, he feigned weakness, luring his enemies into a trap. Then he struck. The Allied armies collapsed in confusion. The victory was so dazzling, it became his masterpiece, the Son of Austerlitz. But not all went his way. At sea, Britain's Admiral Nelson destroyed the French and Spanish fleets at Trafalgar, ensuring Napoleon could never invade the island nation. Still, on land, he was unstoppable. He crushed Prussia at Jena and Auerstedt in 1806, then humbled Russia at Friedland in 1807. At the Treaty of Tilsit, Napoleon and Tsar Alexander met on a raft in the middle of a river, dividing Europe between them. By 1807, Napoleon was master of the continent, save for Britain, which defied him still. In 1808, Napoleon made a fateful move. He placed his brother Joseph on the throne of Spain. But the Spanish people would not accept a foreign king. From villages and mountains, they rose in revolt. This was not war as Napoleon knew it. This was guerrilla warfare, hit-and-run attacks, ambushes, assassinations. Peasants armed with knives and muskets melted into the hills after striking French patrols. For the first time, French soldiers faced a war without honor, without fronts. Britain seized its chance. Under the steady Duke of Wellington, British troops landed in Portugal and joined the fight. Year after year, Napoleon poured soldiers into Spain, and year after year they bled. Napoleon called it his Spanish Ulcer, a wound that would not heal, draining his strength even as he won battles elsewhere. Austria, hoping to shake off French domination, rose again in 1809. Napoleon marched with speed, striking at Aspern-Essling near Vienna. For the first time, he tasted defeat on the battlefield. Yet he recovered quickly. 2 months later at Wagram, he commanded one of the largest armies Europe had ever seen. The battle thundered for 2 days, cannons booming, cavalry clashing. In the end, Napoleon broke the Austrians and forced them to sue for peace. Though victorious, the fight showed cracks in his empire. The French were stretched thin, their allies resentful, their enemies growing bolder. Napoleon's star still shone, but the shadows were lengthening. The greatest gamble came in 1812. Angered by Russia's defiance of his continental system against Britain, Napoleon launched the most ambitious invasion in history. With over 600,000 men, the Grande Armée, an army of Frenchmen, Italians, Poles, Germans, marched east. But the Russians refused battle, retreating deeper into their vast land. They burned crops, villages, even Moscow itself. When Napoleon entered the city, it was in flames. Winter arrived early, cruel and merciless. Hunger, frostbite, and ceaseless attacks by Cossack raiders decimated the French. Men froze in their sleep, horses collapsed in the snow. Of the 600,000 who crossed the Niemen River, fewer than 100,000 returned. It was the most devastating defeat of Napoleon's career, the beginning of the end. Europe sensed weakness. Britain, Austria, Prussia, and Russia formed the Sixth Coalition. At Leipzig in 1813, the largest battle in European history to that point, over 500,000 soldiers clashed. Napoleon fought brilliantly, but he was outnumbered. Allies and subjects deserted him. One by one, his marshals lost heart. The French army was driven back in ruin. It was called the Battle of Nations, and it broke Napoleon's hold on Europe. By 1814, the Allies invaded France itself. Napoleon fought desperately, winning small victories with dwindling troops. But Paris, the jewel of his empire, fell to the enemy. On April 6th, Napoleon abdicated. The Emperor of Europe was stripped of his crown. His enemies sent him into exile on the small island of Elba, off the coast of Italy. He ruled it like a tiny kingdom, but his eyes still burned with ambition. For Europe, it seemed the nightmare was over, but the world had not heard the last of Napoleon. In March 1815, Napoleon escaped Elba and landed in France. Soldiers sent to arrest him instead knelt before him. "Vive l'Empereur!" they shouted. In weeks, he swept back into Paris, the throne his once more. Kings and emperors recoiled. The final showdown was set. At Waterloo in June 1815, Napoleon faced the Duke of Wellington and the Prussian general Blücher. All day, rain turned the battlefield to mud. French columns surged forward, breaking against British lines. At last, the Prussians arrived, tipping the balance. As evening fell, Napoleon's army collapsed. The old guard, his elite veterans, fought to the last. But even they could not turn the tide. Napoleon fled. His dream was over. This time there was no mercy. The Allies exiled him to St. Helena, a lonely rock in the South Atlantic, far from Europe. There, surrounded by the endless sea, Napoleon lived out his final years, dictating memoirs, reliving victories, brooding on defeat. In 1821, he died, whispering of France and glory. Yet his shadow endured. His Napoleonic Code shaped modern law. His wars spread nationalism and revolution across Europe. His legend, as soldier, emperor, conqueror, and exile, outlived him. The Napoleonic Wars had redrawn the map, toppled empires, and scarred a continent. They were the wars of a man. But more than that, they were the birth pangs of modern Europe. In the end, the eagle that had soared above Europe was caged upon a lonely rock in the Atlantic. Napoleon Bonaparte, soldier, emperor, exile, died far from the thunder of cannons and the cheers of armies. His empire was gone, but his legend was only beginning. The wars he unleashed reshaped the world. Borders were redrawn, monarchies restored, and new nations stirred with the fire of nationalism. Britain emerged supreme at sea, while on land the great powers learned that unity, not division, would decide the fate of Europe. Yet beyond maps and treaties, it was the memory of one man, his genius, his ambition, his downfall that haunted the century. He had shown what a single will could achieve and how quickly it could unravel. The Napoleonic Wars were not just battles of muskets and sabers. They were battles of ideals, fought in the crucible of revolution. And when the smoke cleared, Europe was never the same again. The drums fell silent, the fields grew quiet, but the shadow of Napoleon's empire lingered, etched forever in history, a reminder that glory and ruin often march side by side. If you enjoyed this journey through the Napoleonic Wars, make sure to like this video, subscribe for more untold history, and share your thoughts in the comments. Was Napoleon a hero, a tyrant, or something in between?